Hello, everyone. My name is Amit Haddad, and today I'll be discussing a little bit more about social engineering. Just to talk a little bit about the agenda that I'll be discussing, I would first go over a little bit of background information of what social engineering is and the types of, different types of histories of social engineering. Then I'll go on to discuss some of the types of social engineering that there are, such as fishing, baiting, spearfishing, and more other scenarios. Then I'll go into discussing some use case scenarios of social engineering attacks that actually can occur, just some journal articles that that happened in the real world, and some of the lessons that we can learn from how to prevent social engineering attacks in the future. So, what is social engineering? I found three different sources, like website sources and uh, reliable sources about what social engineering is. So, WebRoot, which talks about that it's the art of manipulating people so that they can give confidential information. Digital Guardian, uh, uh, which is like a good source, says that it's a non-technical strategy cyber attackers use that relies heavily on human interaction and then often involves tricking people into breaking standard security policies. Investopedia discusses that it's the act of exploiting human weaknesses to gain access to personal information and protect the systems by manipulating individuals. So what we get out from all of these three web sources is that social engineering is really defined as someone on the other side that the users trust, uh, and hackers use that as an advantage to try and gain sensitive information from them. So, what are the problems with social engineering? We find that many employees in the workforce are not trained to detect phishing activities. I like to see this as like how there's fire drills in elementary and middle schools. The reason why there's fire drills is that to get to the familiarization of what happens to occur when a fire happens. So, to many employees in the workforce are not really trained about what might be a phishing email attack, and this needs to be addressed to, I think, many companies globally, just to see and familiarize people with how it works of a phishing attack. And also, it could cause reputable damage to a person's reputation and emotional distress. This is commonly seen for cyberbullying among high schoolers and elementary schoolers, which are used to an advantage of social engineering attacks. And also, you find that 77% of phishing attacks are all socially based attacks. So, this is common, not just some kind of hacker that's like in a black, you know, like someone that's unknown. It's something that you might even know a person, and you're and it's the most one. It's a person that might be the least likely for you to expect it to happen to. So a little bit about the history of social engineering attacks. You could date back as far back as the biblical times with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So, for those of you who don't know the story of what Adam and Eve went through, basically in the biblical text, Adam and Eve are put in this wonderful, beautiful Garden of Eden, which is kind of a heavenly. And God told them that they could eat any fruits in the world except for the tree of knowledge. So, along comes the snake and deceives Eve from eating that tree of knowledge attack, and he used a type of social engineering tactic by getting Eve to trust the snake, and from that he was able to deceive her from actually uh, eating the fruit. Um, Another modern day social engineering attack can occur from like prank calling someone in order to reveal personal or sensitive information. This is more known as pretexting, which is someone that's acting like someone you are not on another line and like being able to gain sensitive information. And what we all know is as phishing, as we discussed multiple times in discussion board, really started in the mid to late 1990s, where people are asking for personal data via email or other malicious links that are sent to text, and it's been more commonly used nowadays. So some of the types of social engineering attacks, as we discussed a little bit about phishing, then there's also what's known as spear phishing, which is a subset of phishing, but is targeted to a particular group, uh, whereas phishing could be just targeted to anyone. Then there's what is known as pretexting, which is like the idea of the prank calling someone and then acting like someone else is on another line to try to gain sensitive information. Then there's also what is known as vishing, which is kind of recreating a voice response system and attaching it to a toll-free number, and then they're able to manipulate people into calling other phone numbers and being able to go and try and gain sensitive information. Then there's also what is known as baiting. This is known in many TV shows that they like to play this along, where if someone leaves an infected USB drive with the hope of someone else picking it up, and then once they insert the USB drive into the computer, it will come into get infect the computer can get infected with viruses. So a little bit about some of the current events that happened, some phishing attacks that happened recently. There was a hacker that tried to hack into a company support center system by handing out password resets using Twitter accounts. And the hacker was able to get into the account, the call GoDaddy with 4-digit credit card information that he somehow got from a different source, and that tricked the web hosting company into handing out a password reset. This was able to The hacker was able to gain access to the user domain account and was vulnerable for deletion of all of the Twitter account. This is something that really happened recently, and you've got to be careful with companies' uh, security policies. Another use case scenario that I talked about, this is another journal article that I read, was about a NATO group that catfished soldiers to prove a point about privacy. So in this, and there's a research group called NATO's Strategic Communicator Center of Excellence, tested just how much they could influence a soldier's real world actions through social media manipulations. So what happened was that they created fake profiles for military soldiers to join fake Facebook profiles and disclose military information. The article said that as little as $60, but I think it's even less than that. They were underscore personal information against well-trained soldiers. So what's surprising about here is that these soldiers were supposed to be very trained and about this types of attacks, but they were able to still get catfished and leak sensitive information. Another journal article I read was about a fake persona that named Mia Ash, and she was able to catfish target Middle Eastern companies. So what would happen is that there was an employees in the company that would kind of trust this persona of her social media account, and this Ash persona would talk to this one employee over a month, which ended up quickly like gaining that trust, which resulted in a download of malicious malware towards the company's computer called PuppyRat. And unfortunately, this was able to link sensitive data with malicious software that they had on their computers, and it was like a big deal. So what can we learn from all of this? There's a guy who I read about. His name's Dr. Robert Cialdini. He wrote a book about influencing the psychology of persuasion, and I think it's how people can guard themselves from social engineering attacks by training about some of these principles. The six principles are reciprocation, commitment and consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity. I'll talk a little bit about what all of these mean, a little bit in depth, and then we'll go and discuss how we can learn from it. So reciprocation is talks about how people are hardwired to respond to a favor, often not in direct proportions that is done to us. So sometimes when people are willing to do a favor, the first inclination is to give that favor back to a person because they're being so kind. The second principles of psychology is commitment and consistency. This is about making a choice or taking a stand, which can encounter personal and interpersonal pressure to behave consistently with that commitment. So, kind of going off of doing that favor, and you have that expectation of doing something for the other person, and kind of peer pressuring them into doing something. Hackers use a lot of that type of psychology to try and manipulate other people and gain sensitive data from that. Another kind of lesson learned you can learn about is what's called social proof. So this is where an attractive enough profile with other members of organization is linked to its profile, and that is highly likely to make a person add himself to that network. So think about like how someone with a Facebook profile that has 200 mutual friends. That 200 mutual friends is most likely be able to go in and make that person trustworthy, and from there could a person would automatically try wants to add himself to that network, so it's like more and more people are getting becoming more famous from that. And then there's also liking. People prefer to say yes to a trustworthy and likable individual. So sometimes a hacker might not be like some kind of very bad guy. Like he might act all trustworthy and likable, which could gain trust from other people, and that's how they could gain access information. As you can see from catfishing, Tinder, things like that. This is like the most common way tactic of having social engineering attacks. Then there's also what is known as a authority, which is a fake authority letter, a letter coming from a government agency or some authoritative figure will be highly compliant to a request. So, like places like Drexel or something like that, if someone's like to put in a Drexel logo or something of that sort, then they would be able to go in and like have that power of giving over sensitive information. Then there's also what's known as scarcity. Scarcity is the time and often makes people comply with requests in violation of policy and common sense. So that has to do with like if someone's violating a policy or something like that. That has to do with also a little bit about authority as well. So what can you learn from here? You can learn from here that social engineering attack is often occurred when individuals are uneducated of the matter. So, like I talked about earlier about how fire drills is done in elementary and high schoolers, the same thing has to happen in companies with sending out phishing emails so that people are able to recognize them and be prepared from if an actual phishing attack can occur. Then people need to reassess company security threats that are a good way to prevent social engineering access. So we've seen from a lot of these different types of companies that they were able to go in and hackers were able to go in and access this information, even though it's based off like the lack of securities in companies. And by understanding the principles of social engineering, that can also be a good way to prevent attacks from happening in the future. So by knowing all of these three attacks, these six principles, it's able to come in and try and prevent social engineering attacks from occurring. I hope you liked my show. This is my presentation, and these are my references. And if you have any questions, please comment below. Thank you.